good friend, your very first best friend. So just think about it. Maybe you met on the playground. Maybe you met playing t-ball, or maybe like your parents were friends with their parents. So have you ever had some of those relationships, like you're friends because your parents are friends, so just when they spend time together, you spend time together, and you develop a friendship like that. So I want you to think back to one of those very first friends, like who pops into your head, and you thought that friendship would last forever. But then maybe the dark days of middle school came, and maybe they wanted, maybe you wanted to join band, and they didn't want to join band, and they didn't understand why you wanted to join band, and so you started traveling in these different circles, and you weren't doing everything together. You were doing stuff over here and making friends over here, and they were doing stuff over there, and that friendship starts to drift apart. Or maybe it was in high school, and you're taking different classes. You're not always in the same classes, so you're taking different classes and meeting new friends, and you don't like the new friends that your old friends made. And so when you all get together, there's that awkwardness, and you find yourself drifting apart. I remember, usually I ask permission, so don't tell Alana I'm talking about her without her being here. But I remember Alana specifically, it's like every stage of school, like that friendship circle changed. And maybe you had a similar situation. Her friends in middle school, once 6 months into middle school, those names I was hearing weren't the same names I was hearing in elementary school. And then in high school, it kind of changed again. And so things change. Our friendships, our relationships, they change. And maybe it was college, and you get a roommate at college, and you're experiencing college together, so you become really close, and you're going to the cafeteria together, and you're going to classes together. And then the roommate finds that boyfriend or finds that girlfriend. And all of a sudden you go from the dynamic duo to the third wheel. And you're like, how did this happen? And you start losing that friendship, or you feel like you're losing that friendship. Maybe it was a business partner or a coworker that changed careers or moved away to a different location. And one of the challenges in ministry is unfortunately in ministry you do move, occasionally and have to leave behind and say goodbye to not just a friend, but to a family, to a group, a family of God, and go into another place and start new relationships and kind of restart on building those relationships, and that can be a challenge. So things and places and people, they change over time. It's just part of life, part of the way life works. Things change over time. And when things change in a relationship, we can do some weird things. When we have a relationship, somebody we're close to, and we sense things changing, we can do some pretty weird things because we get scared. And maybe you're the kind of person who, when that happens, you pull back. You text less, you call less, you just pull back. You prepare yourself because you don't want to get hurt. And so you just kind of pull yourself back, you withdraw, because you kind of see the signs of the direction that things are going, and so you just kind of withdraw and pull back so you don't get hurt, so you don't get attached any longer. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you're the kind of person that you should really push forward. You call more, you text more, you get on Facebook and you see what they're doing and who they're hanging out with, see if anybody's replacing you in their relationships and in their time, and you just kind of go all in and try to figure out what's going on is to save the relationship. We do some strange things because change is a breeding ground for fear. When we sense things changing, none of us really enjoy change, and it can cause us to be afraid of what is coming, what are the changes going to mean. And we see that in today's movie. We're doing this series, Zoah at the Movies, using movie clips as sermon illustrations. And today, as you saw this morning, we're talking about Ralph Breaks the Internet. Came out in 2018, Disney computer animated movie. It was a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph. And as the sequel begins, Ralph and Penelope, two of the main characters in the game, they've been friends for 6 years when the sequel begins. They do everything together. They really enjoy that. So you see them there in that picture. There is Ralph and Penelope, and they are best friends. And if you're unfamiliar with this movie, they are actually video game characters. So in this fictional world, they live in inside the video game. And so when the arcade is open, they go into their video game like we would go to work. That's their job. So they go to their video game when the arcade's open, and then when the arcade is closed, they live their lives outside of their games, and they associate with each other, and socialize with each other, and have those relationships and stuff. But Penelope she is bored with her game. She's in a racing game called Sugar Rush, but she knows all the tracks. There's only 3 tracks, and she knows them all. She knows all the shortcuts. She's just getting bored with the same game over and over again. So Ralph tries to help. He sneaks into her game and he changes the course, kind of changes it up a little bit, give her something new, something exciting. But in the course of that, this leads to a glitch in the game, and while our player was trying to play the game, the steering wheel breaks off. And so the game is out of order, it's broken, and since Sugar Rush is such an old game, the arcade owners aren't even sure if they can get the part to fix the game. So Sugar Rush is out of order. Ralph thinks, well, this isn't so bad. We can spend more time together. We can hang out together. It's not that big a deal. You didn't like the game anyway, so now we can spend all this more time together. But she starts having like an identity crisis. She has no game to go to. And she says to Ralph, if I'm not a racer, Ralph, what am I? We've dealt with identity questions before in our lives. If I'm not this, I had this job or this career or this relationship, and if you take that away, what am I? It's like, if I'm not a racer, Ralph, what am I? And Ralph responds, you're my best friend. But to that, Penelope replies, that's not enough. And Ralph is just visibly upset by her answer. The answer was so blunt and brutally honest, and she tells him she just wants to be alone, and she walks away in that scene. So one of the things that manifests itself when change occurs, especially changes in a relationship, it's insecurity. And that's what we really want to focus on today, is this idea of insecurity. Insecurity it's a state of self-doubt that arises from comparison. And I actually got that definition from another sermon, and I kind of chewed on it a little bit. I struggled with it. Is insecurity, it's definitely a state of self-doubt. But I kind of chewed on that arises from comparison. I'm like, is that always true? So I tried to think of examples where we were insecure about something that didn't involve comparison. And actually, the more I thought about it, it always involves comparison of something, whether it's a person or an event or a situation. Because if you don't know what you're missing, you're not going to be insecure about anything. I mean, if it's when we look around and see other stuff that we get the sense of things aren't as they should be, and we doubt ourselves, we doubt our abilities to measure up to some standard that we see. For some reason, we feel like we're not measuring up. So I do think that insecurity results from comparison when we look around and start doubting ourselves. We compare in relationships. Insecurity can happen. We compare ourselves to the other person in the relationship. And why don't they feel the same way about this that I do? This makes me mad and they're not mad. We're supposed to be friends, Why aren't they upset like I am? Or, man, I'm really excited about this. And why aren't you showing the same excitement? We're supposed to be best friends. And so we start comparing our take on something to the other person in the relationship and wonder, why it's different. What's wrong with this relationship? Or sometimes we can compare our relationships with other relationships. Why doesn't he look at me the way that her husband looks at her? Why doesn't our friendship look like their friendship? Why don't our kids treat us the way that their kids treat them? So we can compare our relationships to those relationships outside of us and start being insecure about the state of our own relationships. So fear of change, our relationships are changing, and then adding comparison to that can fuel insecurity, and we just become insecure about who we are and the relationships we're in. So in the movie, Ralph has this idea. He's going to go into the internet and go to eBay, and they're going to get the part they need to fix Penelope's game. They're going to get that steering wheel. So they go and they get the winning bid, and then they realize that for eBay you have to pay for the stuff that you get. When you win it, you got to pay for it. They don't have any money. They're video game characters. So they're trying to figure out how to get some money so they can pay for the thing, for the steering wheel, for the part that they need. And they run into a character named Spamley. I got a picture of Spamley here. You want to get rich playing video games? So they need Spamley, and he gives them this idea of what they're going to do. They are going to go into this game called Slaughter Race. They're going to steal the car in this racing game, and they're going to sell the car to get the money they need. So they go there and they try to do just that. But the car's owner, his name's Shank, and I have a picture of her also. She chases them down in another car. There's this chase scene. She tells Penelope, so they finally, big chase scene at the end. She stops them from stealing the car, but she's saying, Penelope, you're a great racer. So she compliments, you're not getting my car, but you're a great racer. And so Shank is commending Penelope on her racing skill, and you can just see in Ralph's face, because Penelope and Shank start forming this friendship, and you can just see the jealousy in Ralph's face, because they have this racing thing in common. And so that begins to simmer in Ralph. As they leave, Penelope, she tells Ralph all the great things that she likes about Shank as they leave. Shank is so cool. And this just feeds that jealousy. And when we look at the signs of insecurity, that's the first one, and it's jealousy. When we're insecure, we can be jealous of other relationships. We can be jealous of other people's opportunities. We can look at them and they got this great opportunity. Where was that opportunity when I was looking for something? We can be jealous of our friends' other friends. They're spending more time together. It seems like they always invite that person and they don't include us. This person is getting the applause, the commendations, the approval, and I'm not, and we struggle with that. We wonder why them, not me. Insecurity even robs us of being able to share the joy in our friends' joy. Like when our friends, good things happen, and we can't even celebrate with them because of our insecurity. So the movie, Ralph and Shank sends them to says you can get money by posting these videos on BuzzTube, and she can make money that way instead. So they start doing that, and the videos are a hit. The videos of Ralph are a hit. They're being sent out so that people can click on it, so they can just get more popular and go viral with these videos of Ralph getting abused and doing all kinds of crazy things. And so they're sending these pop-out ads so that they get more clicks and more clicks and more clicks. And Penelope wants to help, because these videos are of Ralph, and so she wants to contribute. This is for her benefit, is to get her steering wheel. So she wants to go out and bring out some of the pop-out ads to get more clicks. But Ralph doesn't want her to leave, because they do everything together. And he's hesitant to let her leave, and it's because they do everything together. He doesn't want to be apart from Penelope for even a second. And that's another sign of insecurity. It's clinginess. Most of us have probably experienced at least one clingy person in our lives. You can never spend enough time with them. You know, it's never enough time. It's never enough attention. They're afraid that you might find something else or someone else to replace them. That kind of clinginess is not good fodder for a relationship. It's not good friendship material. And so those people, that insecurity ends up kind of backfiring. So the signs of insecurity, jealousy, and clinginess. So in the story, Ralph makes enough money to purchase the new steering wheel. So life can get back to normal, because Ralph is all about normal. Even the fun stuff that him and Penelope used to do, when they hung out, it was the routine. He had a routine and things he liked to do. He doesn't like change. So get the steering machine, get back to the arcade, get life back to normal. So Ralph is trying to get a hold of Penelope by phone, and he accidentally overhears Penelope. She's confiding in Shank. It's like a video phone call, and Penelope doesn't realize that it's answered, and Ralph overhears her, and they're talking about how she really was supposed to stay in the Slaughter Race game. She doesn't want to go back to the arcade. She wants to stay there in that game and not go back home. And Ralph is just totally dejected by this. He says this is his best friend, and she doesn't want to go back home. So he does something desperate to not lose his friend. He goes back to his family and asks about, is there a possible virus that he can use to make the game less exciting? So Penelope doesn't want to stay in the game. So a virus puts the virus in the game, makes it boring, makes the car slow, and so she'll decide that she wants to go back home with Ralph. So they go and they find a virus that's going to do that, and that's another sign of insecurity when Ralph is trying to control the situation. He's trying to take it out of Penelope's hands, and he's just trying to control, trying to manipulate. And that's it. We're in dangerous territory in our relationships when we get to this point. And the scary thing is sometimes we don't realize what we're doing and try to control our relationship. Sometimes we can use things like demands or ultimatums, or deceit, manipulation, trying to control the circumstances, control the relationship to get what we want out of it. These things should have a place in a friendship or a relationship. And often in an insecure person, it can produce the exact results that we're afraid of in the first place, and it creates further distance, further damage to the relationship. When we are so insecure that we're worried about losing something, whatever it is, whether it's a person in a relationship or whether it's something else in our lives that we're afraid of losing, if we let insecurity get the best of us, and we try to cling to it, and we try to control it, sometimes we can lose the very thing we are trying to hold on to, the very thing we're afraid of losing. We're responsible for the losing of it. So in the movie, Ralph unleashes this virus in the game, but things backfire. And the virus begins to shut down and reboot the game, and almost killing Penelope. Ralph has to go in, and he's able to break them out of the game right before it shuts down, saving Penelope. And after they escape, Ralph lets slip that the virus was his fault, and that's the scene we saw at the beginning. She finds out that he's the one that put the virus in the game, and she is upset. She goes away. She tells him to leave her alone. She wants to be wherever he's not. And that is the scene. Those best friends for 6 years in between the two movies. But you saw that scene, and things aren't very good because Ralph's insecurity, he made bad friendship choices, and his friend has walked away from him. And while he's distracted right after that scene we watched, the virus, it scans Ralph's insecurities because the virus says it looks for weaknesses, insecurities, and it amplifies them. So it scans Ralph, and Ralph is just so insecure about losing his best friend, and so this just makes the virus multiply, and it escapes that game, and it sends out these little virus Ralphs throughout the internet. So Ralph breaks the internet. So that's where the title comes from. He's going out, these virus Ralphs are going out, destroying the internet in a search for their best friend that they're afraid they're going to lose because of Ralph's insecurity. So these thousands and thousands of Ralph clones are breaking the internet. And that's another thing about insecurity. It doesn't just stay the same. It spreads. It affects other relationships. Insecurity breeds insecurity. It affects other areas of our lives. We lose our confidence in other areas of our life when we allow insecurity take a hold on us. When we look at the Bible, we can see several examples of insecure people that had to overcome insecurity. And the Bible is full of examples of that. We could look at Moses, but we talked about Moses a couple of weeks ago, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on him, but we see Moses' insecurities. We see some in Gideon. We see some in the Apostle Thomas, called Doubting Thomas, because he's like, until I see Jesus, until I see the scars, I'm not going to believe. We see insecure people throughout the Bible. Today I want to look at the church in Corinth. We look at Paul's letter to them in 1 Corinthians. And so when you look at 1 Corinthians, you see, if you take a step back and just take a broad look at Corinthians, you can see there's some insecure people. As new Christians, Paul had come to Corinth and he started the church, and one of his missionary journeys, and then Paul's moving on, and he's writing this letter back to them. But you can tell by some of the stuff that Paul's talking about, there's some insecurities. These new Jesus followers had some insecurities that they were dealing with. Look at chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. Paul says, my brothers and sisters have informed me that there are quarrels among you. And what I mean is this: one of you says, I follow Paul, another, I follow Apollos, another, I follow Cephas, still another, I follow Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? So he's asking some rhetorical questions. And it's like, was Paul crucified for you? No. Were you baptized in the name of Paul? No, you were baptized in the name of Jesus. So there's this insecurity about which preacher, if you want to use today's terms, which minister, which leader they were following. It's like, well, I follow Paul, and he's the one I look to for authority. So no, I look to Cephas, Peter, and for his authority. I look for Apollos. So there's some insecurity about this. So who is better? Who's like higher on this ladder in the Corinthian church? Which one of us is higher up on the ladder because of who we follow? And that just sounds so insecure that you would even have to have that kind of argument. But they were quarreling about that, about who followed who. Instead of who followed Christ, it was who followed who was baptized by who. We see other places. We see in 1 Corinthians in chapter 6. Apparently, there were enough cases of Christians suing other Christians that Paul has to address it in chapter 6. These lawsuits among believers, and who knows, we don't know what the lawsuits were about, but it just sounds like if there were enough, that Paul had to mention it in a letter, when he had all the other stuff he could have mentioned. He took the time to highlight that in chapter 6. It must have been a problem. In chapter 7, we see Paul singles out apparently single people were feeling insecure. That they, in their singleness, they weren't married, and I think we can even relate to that today. I think that even today, culture puts this emphasis on being a couple, on having that someone, being in that relationship. And so it's hard for people who are single to live that singleness without feeling insecure. Am I ever going to find somebody? Is there going to be somebody for me? And so Paul addresses that in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. And it's like, it's nothing, it's good to be single. There's ways God can use you. Don't be insecure about that. In chapter 12, he talks about spiritual gifts and how people were desiring everybody's gifted in different ways to help build the church up, but people wanted the gifts that put them in the spotlight, the gifts that were getting the attention, the gifts that were make people say, "Hey, nice job, good job, I enjoyed." Maybe it was something that put you in the spotlight. So something that gave you the attention, the reputation. Those were the kind of gifts people wanted, and nobody wanted the service gifts, the behind-the-scenes gifts, the things that kept the church going were just as important. So Paul spends all of chapter 12 talking about we have different gifts, just like we have different parts of the body, and I just can't decide to leave the body. It needs the rest of the body to do what it's supposed to do. And the eye shouldn't be jealous of the ear, and the ear shouldn't be jealous of the arm. It's like it takes it all working together. Some people were insecure about what spiritual gifts they had, instead of just taking them and serving God with them. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31. So he spends all of chapter 12 talking about spiritual gifts, how we're all parts of the same body, different parts, same body, that unity and diversity. And then he transitions between 11 and 12. He transitions between chapter 12 and chapter 13. In verse 31, he says, "And yet I will show you the most excellent way." So here we are, all these different spiritual gifts. But I'm going to tell you the most important thing in all of this: change your perspective, change your insecurities, all the stuff that we've talked about in these last chapters that are insecure. Let me tell you the most excellent way. I keep thinking Bill and Ted when I say the most excellent. So, nobody knows what that is anymore. It's not old. But they are making a third one. So, because that's what the world needed. All right. So, tangent. All right. Sorry. All right. So he's like, and then he launches into chapter 13, which is familiar to probably many of us. It's the love chapter. 1 Corinthians 13 is the chapter about love. Many of us have heard it at weddings, probably read at weddings, but not to sound unromantic, but it's really not talking about romantic love. It's talking about agape love. It's talking about the kind of love that God has for us and the kind of love that we should aspire to have for others. Not just that special someone, but for others. When we talk about love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy. So those things in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So love is the opposite of fear. This love that 1 Corinthians 13 is talking about, it's an active love. We've talked about this in sermons before. That love, it's a verb, it's an action, it's something we do. John also addresses this in 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. Says, he talks about how love and fear are on these opposite ends of the spectrum. My pages stop sticking together. So John says there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. So perfect love drives out fear. So love and fear are these two opposite ends of this spectrum. So perfect love casts out fear, but how do we get from one side? How do we bridge that? How do we get from this fear, from this insecurity that we have? How do we get to this perfect love part? How do we bridge that gap? And the answer is trust. So trust is the bridge from fear to insecurity, from fear and insecurity to love. It's trust. 1 Corinthians 13:7 says love always trusts. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So when we trust in a relationship, it helps us cast out that fear and insecurity. So in our relationship with God, that's the easiest one to get our mind around for this example of love versus fear. If we trust in God, we trust that God is who He says He is. He's all powerful. He's all loving. He loves us. He wants what's best for us. He's capable of taking care of us. He's going to provide for us and our needs. If we trust that He loves us, then we can cast out that fear. We can cast out that insecurity because we trust that He's in control. That's hard to do with God, but sometimes it's even harder to do with people. But we've got to trust other people. We've got to have trust in our other relationships as well. This is, back to the movie. I'm going to show a clip. Hopefully it works. We're having a little bit of issues with this last one. But in this clip, these virus clones of Ralph, it's towards the end of the movie, they combine to form one giant Ralph virus that's chasing after Vanellope and ultimately catches her. I'm hoping the clip works. And take a look at this, and then we are going to close out today. That's it.
Look,
That's the other.
didn't mean for it to happen like this. It's not supposed to be this bad.
You didn't mean for it.
Might have kind of, sort of,
That's it. Put him down, and I'll go and keep him. We'll be best friends forever.
I'm going to do a ball break.
I can bring it up.
Yeah, all right. So in this this heartfelt scene here. Just I'll kind of walk you through it. Penelope, she agrees she's going to go and be best friends with giant virus Ralph if he lets Ralph go. But Ralph's like, no, that's not what I want. And Ralph calls out the selfish possessiveness of it. She's not property. We don't possess her. And he says you need to let her go, and we need to accept her choice to stay in slaughter race. And it doesn't mean that it has to be the end of their friendship. It can actually strengthen their friendship. He says we have to trust her because that's what best friends do. So since Ralph has let go of his insecurities and losing his friend, gigantic virus Ralph starts to disappear. And a few other things happen, but basically happily ever after kind of thing. We have to trust her because that's what best friends do. It takes trust to make friendship work. It takes trust to make a marriage work. It takes trust to make parenting work. We get to a point in our relationships where you can't control, you can't change another person, you can't control another person. So ultimately, it takes trust. We're getting ready for some big changes in our family. Our oldest is getting married in October. Things are moving out of our control. Do we have some insecurities about that? Of course we do. We have to trust in her decision, her choice that she made, and we do. We think Nate's a great guy. We think he's going to take care of her well. So there's nothing about him specifically, but it's that trust of letting your kids go. As parents, if we're successful parents, our job is to get them ready to leave. But that requires trust. You can't control their lives forever. You've got to let them go. And so, even parenting, it takes trust to make it work. You have to have trust. We have to trust in our parenting of them and the job we've done up to this point. We're sitting, she's getting married, two more going off to college. Trust that you've done what you can. Trust them to make the decisions they're about to make, and trust God to look out for them. So all of these relationships take trust. And trust is what helps us defeat this insecurity that can ruin our relationships. Insecurity can ruin our relationships. Trust can make those relationships thrive. So trust in God. Trust in each other. Let's pray together. Father God, thank you for loving us. Thank you for forgiving us. Thank you for calling us your children and adopting us, including us into your family. We don't have to be insecure about who we are because we're your children. So Lord, help us. We were never meant to be alone. You made us to need one another, to be in a family, to be brothers and sisters, to go through life together in community, this community of the church. It was your design for your kingdom, to be a people, not a person, not a follower, not singular followers, but a church, a body, a people. So help us build those relationships with each other. Help us to go out and build those relationships with the lost so that they can come to know you as well. Help us to cast out the insecurities, the self-doubt that we have, that we carry through life that hinders us and holds us back from the best that we can have in relationships. And let's go forward in confidence, in security, and trust. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We stand as we sing together.